Hello and welcome to FTD Talk. My name is John James and I'm writing campaigner for male victims of female perpetrated domestic violence. Today we talk to Sam about his experiences with domestic violence, and after some people were made uncomfortable about last week's interview, then I must give you pre-warning. This week's interview will be very distressing for some. This is Sam's story. Okay, welcome Sam to FTD Talk, and thanks for sharing your story today. And I'd like to start by asking you how the relationship started.
Right. Well, amongst other, I was in a band at the time, a rock band, just going round the pubs and clubs of the Midlands and so on. And this girl was a bit of a band follower, made herself sort of known, and tried to attract my interest. I mean, there's the sort of thing that goes on all the time, and I've never really taken any notice before. And this went on for a while. And then one particular gig, she'd had this complete makeover. I did not recognise her at all. And she actually looked really, really good. And I was in this difficult situation of having sort of totally blanked her previously. And anyway, she really went for it and carried on going for it for about, I don't know, 6 months or so. And and in the end, I succumbed.
Yeah. And what was it like with your partner before the abuse?
Well, we saw each other on and off for the best part of 4 years, I suppose. I'd always at the beginning, I just thought that she wanted a notch on her bedpost, and I thought that when I did succumb, I thought that would be it. I thought she'd be happy and that would be that. But she made it sort of clearer as time went on that wasn't what she wanted, an actual relationship. And eventually we moved in together. But before we moved in together, she was occasionally a bit paranoid. There were a couple of occasions where she got banned from one of the places that the band used to play at for being violent towards a barmaid who apparently was looking at me. I didn't know anything about this until like 2 days later, and there are just a couple of little isolated incidents, but I didn't, because we were only seeing each other maybe once or twice a week, if that. I didn't really think too much of it. But by the time we moved in together, before we moved in together, I would have said it was relatively sort of normal and okay,
Yeah.
I hadn't seen any. I mean, I previous relationships, I've never. They've been like normal relationships, I've never come across anybody like this before, so I probably wasn't quite prepared. After we started living together, which was what she desperately wanted to do, and so on. I don't know. The first thing she started doing was self-harming, and I was. I could see that she'd done a bit of, minor self-harming in the past. You could see it on her arms. But this wasn't minor. This was like, I actually had to take her to A&E the first time. cut herself really deeply. She
Yeah.
staged it. I was outside getting some wood for the log burner, and I came back in, and she'd placed a chair in the middle of the living room, and she was sitting there with a knife. And as I walked in, she cut her arm really. So the wound opened like an orange. I can still remember
Wow.
the noise.
Oh my
And
God.
I rushed her off to A&E. I phoned her mum and dad. They came down as well, and she couldn't explain it. I tried to get the doctors to sort of talk to her about it, and she just wasn't willing to address it at all. And in the sort of weeks afterwards, we had all these conversations, and it involved various things that allegedly happened to her in her past, and so on and so on. I was sort of trying to, I'd sort of almost become her sort of counselor at this point. And a few months after that, I was sitting in the living room. It was about 5:30 in the evening, and I think the TV was on. I was sitting there, and she just came in from the next room, punched me really hard on the nose so that I bled, and ran off back into the other room giggling. And I've still got this like very slow motion video thing in my head of that. And when I sort of, when I stopped, but it took a while for me to sort of process what was, and I got up and I went into the kitchen, and I said, what on earth was that about? And she just broke down into tears. Oh, I don't know what came over me. I'm really sorry. I don't know. I'm so messed up, blah, blah, blah. And we had another long conversation about things and whatever. And she, oh, I'll never do it again. I'm really sorry. And blah. And from then on, this was less than 6 months into living together. It just went downhill. And the problem was that, see, if we'd been like having an argument and she'd lost her temper and tried that sort of thing, you can understand. You can sort of see it coming. You can maybe, I don't know. It's a lot more understandable. But this was always just completely out of the blue. It was always completely random. That there'd never been, as far as I was aware, everything was fine, and then all of a sudden she'd just start. Well, it usually started with hitting. Sometimes she'd use an object. Sometimes she'd throw things. She'd try and scratch me as well as punch me. And I used to end up.
Sorry, would there be any argument before then? Would she lose her temper emotionally, or would it just
No? I mean, that's
the
point. I couldn't. I had no pre-warning at all.
Yeah.
None at all. And it was usually when either I was, like maybe I had a cup of tea in one hand or something, so I was not instantly able to put my hands up to defend myself, or when I was asleep as well. That sort of got more and more. But I just used to curl up in a little ball, basically, and mostly on the ground, sometimes on the sofa, but mostly on the ground, and just let her burn herself out. And in maybe the first year or so, she would usually be all tearful and apologetic afterwards, but then as time went on, that just got less and less, so that by the end of the 6 years that we lived together, it just, she had basically stopped acknowledging it at all, and wouldn't even, wouldn't acknowledge it, wouldn't discuss it at all after it happened.
And how did that make you feel?
Well, I managed to get her to move out in the end, although that took a bit of doing. It was just after one act too many, really, and we managed to, again. She had got. She was a little bit aware again of maybe that she needed some help, and she moved out to a flat a few miles away, like 10 minutes away, and we continued to have a relationship, but just not living together.
Yeah. And did you ever talk to anybody, friends or family, about how she was behaving?
Well, I had shared care of my two kids from my first marriage, and they were, well, when I started living with this girl, they were aged 6 and bloody hell, hang on, 6 and 15. Yeah, I think that's right. My daughter would have been, oh no, not 15. 12. Yeah, my daughter would have been 12. My little boy would have been 6. So yeah, and I had them half the week. And to begin with, that was fine, and they sort of, embraced her, and she was quite keen to, get on with them and so on. But as time went on, well, firstly, they could see that I had bruises and scratches, and I think they heard some of the things that went on. They didn't see it, but they heard it, and they saw the aftermath. And also, she started to be, well, just to blow hot and cold with them, which is very confusing for a child. If somebody's incredibly nice to you one day and then really just horrible to you the next day for no particular reason, I think it's it's very confusing. So they were quite glad when she moved out. I hadn't told anybody in that way. It's in my head. She had some issue or other. I was trying to help her with it. I tried to get her GP to help her with it, and he supposedly sent her off to see psychologists and things, but she just never kept the appointments. But the classic time was we went for Sunday lunch with her mum and dad, and at the time I had quite an impressive black eye. Her dad asked, where did you get that? And I just pointed at her, and her mum and dad just laughed. They thought it was hilarious, and that's that's what it's like, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the difference between male and female victims. If you'd have hit her, then there would have been all hell to pay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And did you never think of going to the police?
It didn't even occur to me. It wasn't until after, well, a bit that we haven't got to yet, but it wasn't until after things got considerably worse and she actually got arrested that I processed it as actually being abuse, because like so many other people, this is now, well, it's 9 years since she got arrested, so the relationship was the 6 years before that, so it's a while ago. And even though I've got an education and so on, I just automatically in my head, domestic abuse was what men did to women when they came back pissed from the pub. That was what it was in my head. I didn't think what was happening to me. I didn't classify it in that way. To me, it was just somebody who had issues having taking them out on me. I didn't see it in that way.
And you felt supportive of her. You thought there's something wrong with her, and you wanted to help with that.
Yes, and I tried and I tried and I tried, and I put up with all sorts. I jumped through all the little hoops she gave me, like, if we move house, I'll be better. So we moved house. If we get married, I'll be better. It's only because I'm so insecure. Okay, so we got married. We had this bloody fairy tale wedding in a castle, and she punched me on our wedding day.
Oh, wow.
She'd lost her phone, and she just got increasingly stressed about it throughout the day. And when I was taking her back to where we were going to be staying after the reception, she just completely lost it and battered me in the car. And yeah.
And what happened after she left? Did the physical abuse end there?
No, I mean, the run up to us separating, the sort of two major things. She had been before, well, when we started living together, and for the first sort of nearly 3 years of that, she'd had quite a good job working in a secondary school as a pastoral head of house. And she'd got suspended in sort of late 2007 it was, and she told me that it was because she'd been using her work computer to send personal emails and bid on eBay and things like that. But she got sacked in the end for gross misconduct, and it wasn't until some years later that I found out that actually she'd been accessing like bondage porn sites and things off her school computer, and she'd managed to get a virus into the school system, which is how come it had been found out, because they took all the laptops in to see where this virus had come from. So she'd got sacked. She got very depressed, and funnily enough, while she was depressed, she wasn't anywhere near as violent. But then, and again, I didn't know what she'd been sacked for. I just knew that she'd been sacked supposedly for bidding on eBay. She managed to get a job teaching English at a prison, teaching male lifers. And this involved being locked in with up to 15 of these. Well, the way she described them, they were mostly sort of massive and mostly black. Locked in a room with them for 3 hours at a time with a panic button. So she used to come back from work absolutely stoked and demand rough instant sex. And what happened one afternoon, I was asleep. I wasn't expecting her back for a while, and I woke up to find that she'd handcuffed my right arm to the metal bed frame with some prison issue handcuffs that she'd stolen. And I sort of woke up, what's going on? And I sort of started to try and sit up. So she hit me round the head with a speaker from the little stereo system we had at the side of the bed, and tied my other hand, my other arm to the bed with some twine. And then basically tried to have sex with me, and I wasn't remotely interested, if you see what I mean. And that made her very, very cross. So she beat the shit out of me and basically left me tied up for 20 minutes, half an hour, and then came back and released me, and she wouldn't talk about it, just completely blanked it. And that was 2009, and didn't happen again for 2 years. And I don't, I hadn't forgotten, but obviously I thought, okay, that was a one-off, and I'd sort of put it away in my head. And then shortly before we separated, again, it was the same scenario. I woke up, she'd managed to do one arm, and then she had it really properly planned this time. She'd obviously been thinking about it, because she had a whole load of stuff in her bedside drawer. So to begin with, she, after she'd made, tied my arms up, she cut my t-shirt off with a craft knife, stabbed me all over with a craft knife, just enough to break the skin, so that I was itching for a long days, weeks afterwards. She had candle wax, candles and an oil burner, and oil. So she poured candle wax on my chest and scraped it off with a craft knife, then poured some hot oil on, and then candle wax again, and whatever. over and over. I've still got a scar on my chest from that.
Wow.
And the thing that made it worse was at the time we had I don't know, I think she was about 4 months old at the time, a little one, our one and only child. Another hoop I'd had to jump through, after if I get married, it'll be fine. If I have my own child, it'll be fine. And to be fair to her, while she was pregnant, she was, there wasn't any violence. But partly because she wasn't drinking, which I think always when she drank, it made things worse. But anyway, she after the craft knife stabbing and the beginnings of the candle wax and stuff, she shoved her fist into my mouth, and it's one of the things I have flashbacks to now, having the fist shoved in my mouth. And I actually thought I was going to die because her fingers were scrabbling away at the back of my throat and I couldn't breathe. Oh. So, but then I realized that actually she was shoving something down my throat. And of course it was a Viagra tablet. I didn't realize that until obviously the effect kicked in. So having done that, she shoved her pants in my mouth and then gaffer taped my mouth so I was gagged, firstly with the pants in my mouth and then with the gaffer tape across it, and carried on with the candle wax and whatever until the Viagra took effect, and then she basically raped me. She also, I've got a horror of having anything inserted up my bum. When I had to go and have a colonoscopy previous to that, and when I'd had the rectal examination, I pretty much screamed the hospital down,
Yeah.
And she knew that. She knew what a horror I had of that. So of course she used her vibrators on me anally, and I was trying not to make lots of noise because the baby had woken up by this point in her Moses basket at the side of the bed, and she was watching. I could see her watching what was going on. God knows what hopefully she doesn't remember anything, but I was trying not to make a noise for her sake. And after she'd finished with me, and of course part of what she did involved squeezing my testicles very, very hard, so that basically so that I couldn't come. Made it absolutely impossible for that to happen. So when she'd finished with me, she sort of climbed off, picked up the Moses basket, sort of cooed to the baby, took it off downstairs, and just left me chained up. Came back, I don't know, half an hour later or whatever, let me go. And I went and sat in the shower for I don't know how long, quite a while. And then I dried myself off and got some clothes on. I went downstairs, and she was sitting in the living room with the baby. And the first thing she said to me was, "What's for dinner?"
Wow. So yeah. Nothing at all.
Not a thing. And I tried to talk to her about it. And after that incident, I dismantled the top part of the bed so she couldn't do it again. She tried, but I'd made it so that I could actually get out, which got me another beating, but that was actually better than the other thing. Yeah.
A lot of people would say, why didn't you leave at that point? Why didn't you kick her out at that point? Why didn't you go to the police at that point?
Well, again, it didn't occur to me that it was a criminal thing. I was, after that, trying to get her to move out. I wasn't moving out because basically I'd put my entire life savings into buying this house. She'd put nothing in at all. I'd been paying the mortgage. I had my two other kids whose home it was for half the week. I had this other child with her. And as far as I was concerned, it was my home and their home. And if anybody was going to leave, it was going to have to be her.
Yeah. Cool.
And like I say, that did eventually happen. She was in one of her. Well, we actually had a reasonable conversation, a rational conversation, where she acknowledged that things were, there was something not right, and she needed to get some help. So when she moved out, this was going to be a 6-month short let while she got some help, and then theoretically we were going to live together again, all being well. And we were still seeing each other every night that I didn't have my older kids. She demanded that I spent with her. And I did sort of say to her, well, you sure you mean every night? Don't you want to, and she was absolutely adamant about that, because basically she still thought that if I had a night on my own, I'd be off shagging somebody, because she'd always had this paranoia, even though she had absolutely nothing whatsoever to base it on. She used to monitor my phone. If the older kid's mum ever called me, she had to be there. And if that ever happened when she wasn't there, that got me a beating, because God knows what I was saying to her, blah, 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 and you just want to get back with her. And she'd remarried and had another child of her own, my first wife. And we only ever communicated about the kids. We were very good with how we did our shared care thing with the kids. We put the kids first, like you're supposed to, and that was fine. Apart from when she got involved with it. So this sort of relationship from a distance carried on. Well, it sort of vaguely worked for a while, because the way her flat was designed, if I sat in the right place, I knew I could escape if I thought, if I could see some signs of anything, if I thought anything was going to go. And a couple of times I did that. I just escaped. I could never do that in the house. She'd always, bar the door. There wasn't an escape,
Yeah.
And I it's funny. Well, it's not funny, but somebody was here. A friend of mine was here yesterday who hadn't been to the house before, and saw that there was a broken floor tile in the kitchen, and sort of said, oh, how did that happen? And I said, well, that's one of the relics of my violent ex. And then I sort of realized that actually this entire house, every single door has been bashed off its hinges by her at some point, so all the hinges are a little bit dodgy. They've been like the screws have been I've refitted the door, if you see what I mean, but they're all a bit wobbly. There's 2 broken windows in the kitchen door, which has got like a glass bit, and it's like I because I live with it every day, I don't see it, you know what I mean? But when somebody else hasn't, and they just sort of, they were fairly sort of speechless about it. But anyway, after sort of 2 months of this long distance, well, not quite long distance, 10 minutes down the road relationship, we'd had a nice day out with the little one, but then on the way back from where we'd been to, like, there's this little petting farm place that we used to go to, and we got back from there and stopped at a pub, and that was probably a bad move. She had a pint. I played with the little one on the play area at the pub beer garden, and we got back, and she wanted to use the loo because we'd gone back to my house, because she'd come to my house, with the little one in her car. Then I'd moved the car seat into my car, and we'd use my car to go out. So she wanted to go to the loo, so she went in the house, and in the meantime I was moving the car seat, and then I'd done that, and she still hadn't come back out. So I went into the house holding little one on my hip, the way you hold. She was 17 months old at this time.
Yeah.
So I had her on my left hip and went in the house. And just as we were getting in, just reached the bottom of the stairs, I could hear all this shouting and screaming and banging from upstairs, and breaking glass. And then the next thing, she comes down, like screaming down the stairs like a banshee, and starts attacking me. just screaming incoherently. I had no idea what was going on, and because I was holding little one on my left hip, I couldn't protect myself very well, and I actually got some proper damage. I couldn't curl up in a little ball. I got some proper damage, mostly down my right hand side, and again I've still got scars from that. And I can't remember exactly how it happened, but she ended up out the front door, and I locked the door and called the police. I didn't need to call the police because the neighbours had already called them, and they were on their way. And so the neighbours sat with her until the police arrived, and the police arrived and arrested her, and then they came back and took photographs of what she'd done. And this was about 5:30 in the afternoon that had happened. So the police were here before 6, and then they took her away. And the neighbours sort of made sure I was okay. And basically I gave little one her tea and bath and bed, and then the police rang me about I don't know, would have been about 9 o'clock, I think, to say, did I want this dealt with under local resolution? And I said I didn't know what that was, so they explained it to me, and I said, well, okay, as long as she agrees to get some help. So they said they'd get back to me, and then they got back to me about half an hour later to say, no, our inspector says it's too serious for local resolution. Do you want to press charges? So I thought about that for a bit, and then I thought, yes, okay, I do, because something's got to be done. So they said, okay, and I thought that was it. But then they rang me back at about 1:30 to say that the CPS had said that they weren't going to charge her, and this is a direct quote. They said, because the jails were too full of looters and rioters.
Oh, so they completely ignore the attack that you endured.
Yeah, so I went to bed, and then at 4:30 in the morning, 4:22 to be exact, bang, 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 bang on the door. And I had a look, and it was the police. So I went down, and they'd brought her back to the house. Even though she wasn't living in the house, they brought her because she told them she was living here, and she told them that that she had residence of our child, which again was a lie because we hadn't been near a court at that point. So I had like a 40-minute standoff with them. They again, this is so ridiculously unbelievable. They were a different shift, so they didn't know what she'd been arrested for. All they knew was that she was at the police station. She hadn't been charged with anything, and she told them she needed a lift home, and this was apparently her home when it wasn't. So, and they were very, very well throughout this whole thing. They were quite aggressive with me, and I would say, no, she's not coming in. She's not taking the child. And I tried to explain what had happened and showed them, because my arm was still bleeding. So eventually, they went away, not before they'd had a look at the sleeping child to make sure the child was okay, and not before they checked that I had nappies and food. So yeah, they went away, and then the next day they came back again because she told them that I'd been making threats towards the child, which again is completely untrue. I hadn't been in contact with her at all. I think I'd already blocked her on my phone at that point. So again, I went through this. They had to see the child. They had to see that I had nappies, and I had the classic "Can you cook?" Ha! Yeah, right. And this happened 5 times in the next 6 days, and eventually I said to the 2 police guys that were here, I said, if you let me know what time you're coming tomorrow, I'll put the kettle on. And they went, oh, has this happened before? And I said, yes, this is the 5th time in 6 days that you've been sent around here. And they went, oh, we didn't know. So they went away and checked up what was been going on. They stopped coming after that.
There's not much communication with the police then between themselves.
Apparently not. No. Apparently not. Yeah.
Sorry, so it was so they stopped coming.
Yeah. And I at that point I'd been doing lots of Googling, and I'd got myself a solicitor who said they could get me legal aid and whatever. And I made an application for a non-molestation order and residence order and prohibited steps, all those things, so that the child couldn't be taken away from me. And we went to court. We got those, and then 2 things happened. Firstly, my legal aid got frozen because, and I didn't find this out for 5 months why, but apparently my solicitor, who was pretty much straight out of college, had made a mistake on my legal aid form and had put my childcare costs in my income box and vice versa. Now, you'd think that the legal aid agency would see what a simple error that was and would, but no, it took 5 months of me having no legal help, no legal aid, nothing. And I couldn't get another solicitor because apparently I was still technically represented. So I had to try and deal with it all myself. And it was impossible, basically. And during this time, she started making ever increasingly serious false allegations. She started off by saying I'd been violent to her. Then she said that, the threatening to kill the child thing, that came up again. Then she accused me of sexually abusing my older kids. So they were all of a sudden subject to a child protection investigation. And I have to say their mum was brilliant through that and knew that it was all part of crap. The kids were totally freaked out by it, by having to answer these questions and so on. And they're still affected by it today. Whatever, nearly 10 years later, it's still quite a raw thing, that. But that obviously found that there was nothing going on. It was all fine, and so then she accused me of having an inappropriate relationship with some unspecified child at the school I was working at the time. I had a part-time job at a secondary school. So of course I got suspended, neutral suspension. For 3 months, I had to go through a full position of trust inquiry, recorded, cautioned interviews with the police. And given that I only lived 500 yards from this school, I was terrified the whole time because, if it gets out that somebody's been suspended, when I'm expecting bricks through the window. Eventually, again, that all came back. No case to answer. Nothing's gone on. I was allowed back to work. Work again was very supportive and very good. They knew that there wasn't anything going on. But it was absolutely horrendous. And I was in a complete state at this time. And we ended up with a shared residence order at the end of this sort of, this was the assault was in the August, and the shared residence order was in the February, and they lifted the non-molestation order. So I was instantly bombarded with, during the time of the non-molestation order, she stalked me from up the road. I lived like at the bottom of the hill, so she'd park near to the top of the hill as she could, to still be able to see the house. and that was more than the 500 meters away that the non-molestation order said she had to stay away. So the police weren't, they said they couldn't do anything about it. So she'd be stalking me from up there. But then after they lifted the non-molestation order, I just got bombarded with messages demanding a key to the house, saying she was moving back in, saying she's going to be moving her stuff back in next week, blah, 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 the whole thing. And again, I was absolutely bloody terrified. I changed the locks and spent as little time in the house as I possibly could, because I was one of the things that she'd done in the meantime that in November, one morning there was a knock on the door and I went to answer it with little one, again carrying little one, because I thought it was the postman. It was about the time the postman usually came, and if it was a parcel or something, I'd have to knock the door. And I opened the door and there were these two big blokes there that I didn't know, and they, the conversation went something along the lines of, we know your wife. Okay. She sucks good cock was the expression. And if you don't give her a baby back, we're going to be back. And then they sort of kicked the door and ran off. So I reported that to the police, and they came out and took like descriptions and so on. And from the descriptions I gave, they were pretty sure that one of them was one of her ex-prisoners from the prison she used to work at.
Yeah.
They tried to track him down, and from what I remember, he obviously had an alibi, of course he did. So I was expecting something like that to happen again. I was expecting her to send some more heavies round, So I was just completely and utterly shocked at the time. I couldn't sleep. I just didn't sleep at all, because if I went to sleep, when I woke up, when you wake up, you have like 5 or 10 seconds before the world hits you, before you remember where you are and what you do. And it was so awful being hit by remembering everything and that my body then just refused to sleep. And I was like just a total mess.
Were you seeing anybody at this time? Were you seeing a doctor about it, or?
No. I mean, I went to my GP. When did I first go to my GP? See, one of the other things, when I was in the relationship, I'd previously been living, before we moved in together, I'd been living 40 miles from where we started living together, and she wouldn't let me move my GP. She had a local GP, or she registered with a local GP. She wouldn't let me do that, and I wasn't particularly bothered, because I never went to the doctor anyway. Do you know what I mean? And the two occasions, I think, when I did have to go to the doctor, she came with me, the 40 miles there and back. And that was obviously to keep, again, I just didn't register it at the time. This was part of the control and keeping an eye, paranoia thing. But I'd registered with a GP by then, after we'd separated. And I think I had a meltdown. I think I just had I can't remember what I'd gone to the surgery for. I think I just had a complete meltdown. Just completely and utterly howled, in front of this doctor that I hadn't met before, and they didn't know what was going on. And I explained, and he was actually, he was the senior partner. I think he'd probably seen it all. He was very understanding and very, very helpful. Of course, they want you to start taking drugs, and I've always refused that. I'm not going to take antidepressants or whatever. I've seen what it does to too many other people. And of course, there's an 18-month wait to see a psychologist. So I got myself some counselling, private. Well, it's one of the. It's called the Rape and Sexual Violence Project in Birmingham. Because by then I'd started having proper flashbacks I didn't know what they were, but it was just like, to begin with, they were like apparitions, the sort of thing that you get in a horror movie where something just suddenly appears. And you know it's not real, but my God, does it look real?
Yeah.
And I'd saw the first time that happened, I was absolutely terrified. The next time I was sort of less terrified, and I shouted at it and it disappeared. But then I had a physical one where I woke up and I couldn't move. I couldn't move my body. Anything I could move was my eyes. And it was dark and I couldn't see her. I couldn't smell her. I couldn't hear her. But I knew she was there and I could feel pressure on either side of my legs. I knew she was like kneeling astride me. That's what it felt like. And then my mouth was being just gradually forced open and a fist went in. And again, I thought I was going to die. It was just a complete replay of that. And then all of a sudden it had gone, but I still couldn't move. I couldn't move at all. And it took me, I don't know how long. It's 20 minutes, 25. I've got no idea how long it took before my legs started to unfreeze. I actually thought at that time that that was it. I was going to be paralyzed for life. That was it. And I eventually, I pretty much fell off the bed and went very slowly on my knees and sat in the shower until the rest of my body started working again. And that was absolutely fucking terrifying. And at that point, I knew that I needed some help because, so the guy at RSVP gave me some strategies to deal with it, which were very effective after a while. It made it, I was having more because I was talking about it, and it's the first time I'd ever told anybody the sort of all the details. And he did warn me that, it might make things worse to begin with, sort of thing. He also suggested eventually that maybe I might like to report this with the help of an ISFA, as they call them, an independent sexual violence advisor, because it was clearly, what had been done to me was clearly a criminal offence. I still hadn't thought about it in that way, and I thought about it, and I was told, it doesn't mean that anything will actually be done. The chances of anything being done about it are actually very slim, because they said only 1 in 4 of the cases that they take to the police end up going to the CPS, and only 1 in 4 of those end up going to court. So I said, okay, I just thought it might be therapeutic for me, and they said they'd accompany me to the police station, whatever. The day before I was due to go and see the police, the ISFA rang me up and said, look, they're really sorry I can't make it tomorrow, but don't worry about it. You can go on your own. They're trained officers. I've spoken to them. Everything will be fine. So I psyched myself up and I went along and I waited in their little waiting area for a bit. And then these 2 female officers appeared and took me into a back room. And the one that was obviously in charge had this big sheaf of papers that she shuffled. And then she took a sheet out and looked at it and looked at me and said, it says here, she used to squeeze your testicles. Well, you must have enjoyed it or you would have reported it sooner.
Jesus Christ.
And at that point, I just couldn't say another word, I would. So I went away. And I made a complaint, and of course they denied saying anything. Of course they did. I talked to the ISFA about it, and I went and redid it with my ISFA female, with another set of officers at a different police station, and this was a bit more respectful. But what they basically did, and I've been told since that this isn't normal, but I didn't know at the time, and all I had to compare it with is what happened the first time, and it was better than that. They put me in a room on my own, and there was a camera recording me, obviously, and a microphone recording me, and they got me to sit in a chair and then barked questions at me while they filmed me, answering. Because I'd been expecting it to be, more face to face. No, it was in this room being barked at. So I answered everything that they asked me. The questioning got quite aggressive towards the end and quite quick fire. And I found myself just sliding lower and lower down the chair. So I was almost horizontal. And then afterwards, they said they would go and interview her, which I think they did. But of course, she's going to say, "Oh yes, I did that." So, and they said, "Oh well, we're not going to, we're not going to do anything about it because there's no witnesses." At no point, even though I made them aware of the fact that I had scars and whatever, and also I'd shown them the photographs of the assault. At no point did they ask to do a physical examination and look at the scars or anything else. At no point did they ask about, my mental health and so on. So yeah, it was nothing got done, and all that happened was it made my ex even worse, because she'd obviously had a visit, and that fired her flames again, and I got more abuse from afar for a while after that.
How is your life now?
Well, oh Jesus, it took me a good 4 years to have any sort of existence at all, really, where I wasn't either completely just anxious the whole time and having it on my head, in my head the whole time, having to deal with stuff the whole time, whether it was one of her bloody allegations or a court hearing or whatever, the whole time. And I think getting a bit of control over the flashbacks was probably a first step. The thing that's got me sort of back to normality is, I'm a musician. I've always been a musician. I worked I've worked in music sort of for most of my life, one way or another. And I couldn't play for the first however long. I couldn't pick up a guitar. I couldn't do anything because it just made me too emotional. I started playing again, not because I'd sort of thought about it, just because basically a song wrote itself in my head and I knew I had to sort of get it recorded and stuff. And that's helped. I'm now back playing again properly, or I was until we had the lockdown, and I don't know if it's ever going to happen again now, because hey, will we still have any venues when all this is over? So that's a bit of an issue at the moment, because that was my main strategy for coping, was being able to go out and play again, and I can't now. But it did make me I did a questionnaire for there's quite a big study going on at the moment, the University of Cumbria. You might have seen it online. The Firebird site, she's called on Twitter. I sort of did the pilot one with her, amongst other, there are other people as well that she was piloting it with. And what one of the questions was, what do you think? What effect has the abuse had on you? And I've never really thought about it before and it diminished me. I wasn't me. it just took me away. I was just basically, I'd sort of retreated within myself completely, just basically trying to survive each day one at a time. And I've sort of come out of that more now, and I found other things to do which help. I've been speaking to students and so on. I've been asked to do that by a service user and care organisation that I got pointed towards, and that, yeah, it's all. But at the end, I'm still involved in legal proceedings, still after all this time, because she stopped me seeing my daughter, who's now 10. She stopped me seeing her in breach of a court order. It's over 18 months ago now, and I've been trying to get it sorted. And yeah, it's still all going on. She tried to have the house sold from under me as well, because we were married. She had a right to whatever, and I managed to get that headed off. She won the first round, and then I won an appeal. So all that time I was imagining that I was going to be homeless, and wouldn't have had anywhere to go, because the other thing that she managed to do was she managed to leave me with £53,000 worth of debt, more than half of which was just hers. And she'd over time, she'd managed to basically transfer any, that amount of money from her credit cards to my credit cards. Oh, because mine had a better rate of interest, and I'll pay the minimum repayments. Don't worry about it. Everything's going to be fine. And of course, and when we separated, we had that in writing as well, that she was responsible for these ones and I was responsible for whatever. And after the assault and the arrests and everything, she just, obviously stopped. So I was left with these massive debts, for which I had to go through an IVA. So I couldn't borrow any money. I couldn't do anything for 6 years and a day. So I was basically looking at being homeless with nowhere to go. I talked to shelter, and they said, "Oh, you'll get a hostel." Yeah, that'd be great. When I put the best part of £100,000 into this house, but like I said, I've managed to head that off for now, so I'm allowed to be here for now. Although in many ways it would be very nice not to be here, because this house is where it all happened. So I've had to completely reorganize and change everything around so that it's not, the only things I haven't done is the broken bits, and the dodgy doors.
And where do you see your life going from now? Do you see it getting better?
Well, if I wasn't connected to her through our child, it would have got better already, because I could just have basically shut her out, and she wouldn't have had. I'm sure she'd still have tried to carry on abusing me, but it wouldn't have mattered so much, just because there's a child involved who I love and worry about. So I can't really see anything getting better until she gets to the age of 16 and she's allowed to do what she wants, because at some point she will rebel against her mother. Her mother's a total control freak, and at some point she will rebel against that. I know she will, and maybe begin to see her mum for what she is,
Yeah.
Which is I've been warning people about this throughout, why make this poor child go through this when actually you can sort it out. But because the whole system is so hugely biased towards the mother, even despite all this history, they're being sacked for work for accessing bloody porn. I've had lawyers say if that had happened to you, you wouldn't see your child ever,
Yeah.
I've also had lawyers say to me that they've had people who've been who've done quite long stretches for GBH who see their children more than I do. So I don't know. Quite, the system is broken, and I've had social workers, CAFCAS officers covering their ears when I try and tell them about some of the things that went on. And they just completely and utterly, they just don't want to know. They're not interested, and they don't believe it. I even had the CAFCAS officer before last insisted I had a psychological assessment because they didn't believe I had PTSD. I thought I was making that up too. So, and then they were very unhappy, of course, when the psychologist said, yes, he does. Yeah.
Well, that is horrific what you've had to go through. And I'm very sorry that you've had to go through. But I really appreciate you being brave enough to give me your story.
Well, if it helps anybody else, I mean, the reason I go and do talks to students is, my motivation for that was if I can help one social worker of the future realize that this is what does go on, then that will be worth it. It's all about just raising awareness, and I think there's a little bit more awareness than there used to be, but I don't think that's translated into men being treated any more fairly, and I really don't think that's the case. It still seems to be that if you're the man, then you're obviously the one who's in the wrong. And yeah.
Well, hopefully that's what this show can do. That if men are coming forward and giving their stories like yourself, then it will get out there, and more men will be helped, hopefully.
I really hope so, because it's not. It's not just for society in general. It's for men who are in these situations and maybe, like me, just didn't see it as what it is.
Yeah.
And there is help now. Before I got some proper counselling, I had some telephone stuff through Mankind. Mankind were great. Mankind were brilliant at signposting me to resources, and also making me realise that it's, because I felt terribly alone when at the beginning of after she'd been arrested and I was going through all the false allegation crap. And I just felt incredibly alone and isolated, and they helped me to realise that actually no, it's happening to loads of men, and I went to a couple of groups where basically all these people from all different walks of life, but my God, their stories were so similar. Yeah, the guy who ran the group used to make this little joke about how all our exes had all been brought up on the same very small island and then dispersed into the community because their tactics were so incredibly similar. There's a false allegation that everybody that I met there had been accused of doing things. And there was one guy who his ex had actually been getting help. She was an alcoholic and had been in and out of rehab, and he had the kids. Then when she was out of rehab, she'd make some allegation. The kids would be removed. They'd investigate the allegation. The allegation would come back as not true, and the kids would be returned. Right. And in 4 years, he'd had 11 different social workers.
Yeah.
And none of them seemed to understand what was going on. None of them put two and two together and said, oh, I can see this has happened a few times before. Maybe we'll treat it with a pinch of salt this time. No, none of that, And that's what's happened to me. And I do understand that, if somebody makes a serious allegation, it has to be looked at. But then you need to look at the history as well. It's been happening to me now for the best part of 10 years. You'd really think that they'd just stop listening after a while, But no.
Well, I really appreciate you talking to me today.
Well, I appreciate you asking, and I appreciate that. I appreciate what you're trying to do, and I really hope that even if one bloke listen to this and go, oh Christ, you know, and realizes what's happening and gets some help and escapes before it's too late. And yeah, it's all worth it, isn't it?
Awesome. Well, thanks very much, Sam, and I wish you all the best for the future.
Cheers, John. Thanks a lot. And same to you.
Cheers now.
Take care. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Hello and thank you for listening. I'd like to thank Sam and indeed all of my guests for their bravery. To come out and say what they're saying takes enormous courage, and I hope all the listeners appreciate that. I hope many more men come on the show and tell their story. It needs to be said, and FTD Talk is a safe and non-judgmental environment for them to do that. I thank everybody for their contribution and for their support. Take care. Peace.
Nothing I could do is ever good enough for you.